Welcome to Season 2 of the Erotic Realm podcast, where we explore the world of eroticism, one erotic realm at a time. I'm Em, a sexologist and kinkster. The mission of the Erotic Realm is to humanize desire in all of its forms, including darker desires. Each episode, we dive deep into the psychology of desire with a sexpert, everyday kinkster, or a kink expert. This is an independent podcast. To support it, please consider becoming a paid subscriber at psychologyofdesire.com, where you'll also find deep dives into desire and surveys that you can participate in. You can also sign up there to get the podcast delivered directly to your inbox when it's released. If you'd like to support the podcast, please consider checking out the brands that support the Erotic Realm. There's FermTech, whose tech ring offers fascinating insights into sexual health by tracking erection quality and nocturnal function. Splash Blanket, who create luxurious waterproof blankets designed for comfort, intimacy, and real-life messes. ProDX Health, who offer discreet, at-home STI testing. While Karoo and Lovents make premium pleasure technology, from couple toys to long-distance interactive devices. Then there's Lioness, who are doing something truly unique in sex tech, using biofeedback and orgasm data to help people better understand their arousal. I'm also partnering with Flow and Desire, science-backed libido support supplements designed to support sexual vitality and well-being. These are brands that I find genuinely interesting, science-backed, and I've used them myself, so they come with my recommendation. You can find the links to all of them in the episode description. If you try them, use the links below. It supports the show at no extra cost to you. And now, back to today's conversation. The following conversation explores a fascinating question. What happens when sexuality, spirituality, ritual, and BDSM are no longer treated as separate worlds? In this episode, I'm joined by Melissa M. Wilcox, a scholar of religion, gender, and sexuality, whose career has explored some of the places where identity, community, and the sacred intersect. Her current research takes us directly into the kink world. For her upcoming book, Devotions, Melissa is exploring spirituality within leather, BDSM, and kink communities, asking how experiences of ritual, power, pain, surrender, and eroticism can sometimes take on profoundly spiritual meaning. We explore much of her journey from Feminist Wicca and LGBTQ Christianity to her research on the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence and eventually sacred kink. We discuss religious self-flagellation, the psychology of sacred experience, and what BDSM might reveal about the human need to create meaning through our bodies. This is a slightly different journey into the erotic realm, one that sits at the intersection of sexuality, psychology, religious studies, and the search for meaning. Enjoy. Hi everyone, and welcome to the Erotic Realm. Today, I'm looking forward to exploring the erotic realm with someone whose work sits at a fascinating intersection of religion, spirituality, sexuality, and psychology. And that's Melissa Wilcox. Welcome, Melissa.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. So to start us off, we'd just like to get a general idea of what your day-to-day life is like. What are you up to these days, Melissa?
Well, it's summer break at the university where I teach. Mm-hmm. So although I have work, it is not set to any time. So I generally wake up early and I just work most of the day, and then I have dinner, watch a little television, usually some repeats, and then head to bed. We're talking at a time when it's mid-morning for you and it's towards the end of the day for me. It's getting dark here in California, even though it's July. It's already starting to get dark, so bedtime's coming.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Can you take us into your academic career and tell us more about that? What is it that you teach? What is it that you study?
I teach religious studies as well as some classes that are cross-listed in gender and sexuality studies, because that's the intersection where all of my work is. I actually began as a biology major. I was headed to vet school. I've always been into horses since I was 12.
Okay.
So I was heading to vet school thinking that I was going to develop a career as a faculty member doing teaching and research and do research on equine lamenesses. And the more equine vets I met the right ones later, unfortunately, the more equine vets I met, the more often I got told, you don't want to ride seriously and be a vet because you can't do both at the same time. At the same time, I also started taking classes that were pre-vet classes, some of which were graduate classes in the med school where I was doing my undergrad. And between those and developmental biology, I was exposed to a lot of animal research that disturbed me ethically. And even though I was able to figure out that that a lot of veterinary researchers don't go in for the kinds of animal suffering that other biology labs do, I still was hesitant. And then I took an elective that happened to be in religious studies, and I was completely hooked. I didn't end up majoring in it, but I did everything else. And then after I graduated, I went off to England for a year to earn my trainer's credentials, my horse trainer's credentials, and to decide where I was heading in grad school. And by the time I came home, I had been accepted to master's degrees in religious studies, and the rest is history.
Huh. Okay.
Yep.
So you mentioned that you took that elective in religious studies and it completely hooked you. What was it about religious studies that grabbed you or grabbed your attention so much?
So this was a class on women in early Christianity. It was the 80s, so nobody said gender yet. It was a course on women in early Christianity, and I was just hooked by the fact that everything that they talked about was about societies and power, and that's still quite definitely the theme of my work. And then I took another class that ended up being on women in the Hebrew Bible, and I was completely hooked at that point.
And you mentioned you went on to study a master's in religious studies as well.
I did, and then I carried on to a PhD in religious studies also.
Okay. So in Australia, there's like a research topic in master's and then PhD. Did you do that as well? And if so, what were your research topics?
My master's thesis was the history of feminist Wicca, especially in California, especially in the US, but in particular in California. And I was tracing the history back to mostly to the 70s and 80s.
What was your biggest learning from that project?
I think I would say, without naming any names of the people I interviewed, I think that I would say that I learned that some leaders are generous and others are not. Some leaders make their own fame through their generosity, and others are not generous precisely because they're trying to protect their fame.
Okay.
I believe anybody who's read the thesis, which God forbid anybody has, I'll leave anybody who's read the thesis or who knows the history of Feminist Wicca in California to figure out which leader I mean.
Okay.
They probably will find it fairly easy to do.
Okay, it sounds juicy. And then
Stories
you went.
I can't tell in public.
I understand. And then you went on to do a PhD. Was that on a similar topic, or did you change course for your PhD?
It was on a related topic, so it didn't stick with feminism. It wasn't historical. It was partially historical, but not entirely. And it started focusing on an LGBT Christian denomination known as the Metropolitan Community Church, which is now international.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'll ask the same question I asked for your master's. What was your biggest learning from this research? I imagine it was a much larger project than your master's research, and you probably went a lot more in depth. What would you say was your biggest learning from that for people that are curious?
I want to say, as somebody who was raised with some exposure to Christianity, but my parents were always open about it and open-minded about it. And so I had stopped believing it. I hadn't ever started believing in Christianity, but I had left. I'd stopped calling myself a Christian as a teenager. And a lot of people know that I'm Wiccan. And so I got sucked into Wicca certainly by the time I was in grad school, even writing the master's thesis. And so it was, again, something about people that I knew. In other words, LGBTQ people. My two best friends, neither one was very Christian. One had been raised Catholic, the other one not raised much of anything, to be clear. And they ended up going to their local MCC, and I was shocked because neither one of them was at all into Christianity. So I want to say that to a certain extent, this project was about figuring out what had happened with my best friends, why my best friends were into the church. And I actually did field work at their church as well as at MCC San Jose. I mean, they're called something different in the book because ethnographers and hiding names and the various tricks that we evolve to figure out how to hide the names. But basically, both MCCs in Northern California, and one of which my two best friends went to, one of which my then girlfriend went to.
Right.
So there was a very personal connection as well.
So before we dive into your current work, I'm curious to hear from you. You know, you're obviously an academic in this area. You're teaching about religion and spirituality, and you've spent a lot of time thinking about it, diving into it, considering it. How would you define spirituality today?
It's hard for me to come up with a definition on the spot. Like I don't have a definition that I usually use. And of course, I haven't been teaching since my injury. And so that's not right at the front of my mind either. Right. But I would say that in general, what people mean when they're talking about spirituality is a personalized practice that is drawn from, but not reliant on, a whole bunch of different religious traditions.
And you just mentioned your injury there. We've spoken before the podcast a little bit about it. Did you want to mention it to the listeners so they understand a little bit of the context of your life at the moment?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the listeners may identify with this, a lot may not. I'm still a horse person. I ride dressage, and I had a horse who was not coming along the way I wanted him to in his training. And I still don't have any memory of what happened, but somehow he threw me off over the arena fence, and I ended up heading down head first, 6 feet, and landing on my head.
Oh my goodness.
So fortunately, I'm alive.
Yes.
Thanks to all the neurologists who assisted me.
Alive and walking and still
walking,
thinking,
although slowly and with a cane, but definitely continuing to improve. Anybody who's listening who's had nerve damage knows, and other people don't, and it would be good if you never had it and had to learn this. Nerve damage takes years to heal. Nerves are very, very slow at healing. So on the one hand, that makes your healing frustrating. The accident just happened 10 months ago for me. And on the other hand, it does promise you a better future for many years.
Well, I appreciate you showing up today, and I'm sure the listeners do as well, despite what's happening in your life and speaking about these topics that we're going to go into. So thank you so much for doing that.
My pleasure.
So the reason why I came across your work was due to your current project, and your current research and upcoming book is titled Devotions. And from what I can see, it focuses on spirituality within leather, BDSM, and kink communities.
Yes.
Can you share more about this project and how you ended up here from your time studying, Christianity, LGBT, spirituality in your PhD? How did you arrive at Devotions as your current project?
Well, I've continued to move one step at a time forward away from the MCC project. Sorry.
That's okay.
So the first project after my second book, after the MCC book, which is called Coming Out in Christianity, my next project, I wanted to look. Well, this was in part because I wasn't getting any jobs, and because of something that a postdoc that I intended to apply for. And yet once I started the project, I got totally hooked. And so even though I never got the postdoc, I stuck with the research, and that eventually became my second book. So what I was curious about.
Sorry, what was your second book?
Queer Women and Religious Individualism.
Okay, yep.
And what I was getting interested in was how many queer religious communities, this is specifically religious, not spirituality focused, but queer religious communities like the MCC, like some Jewish synagogues that I'd been to, that queer and trans synagogues that I'd been to, they all seemed to be predominantly men. And as far as I could tell, nobody who was researching queer communities was saying, oh, there are more men than women in here. So I thought, oh, the women are avoiding the religion. I'm pretty sure that I can guess why, but I need to go find out. So that's what the book was about.
Okay. And why were women avoiding the religion?
All kinds of reasons.
Right.
So some of them had gone through their teenage years and their early 20s and abandoned religion and never come back. A lot of them hadn't had the kids that bring many straight women back to church in their 30s, let's say. And so a lot of the older lesbians that I interviewed had not had an opportunity to have children, and for that reason as well, they hadn't needed like street people did to get back into a religious congregation. Also, there were significant concerns about sexism. Because we're talking about religion here, and so basically people were involved with one congregation and one religion. There was a lot of frustration with the limitations of the figures who were involved in the divine realm.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, for a lot of Christians, Jews, and Muslims, God is male, is masculine, and is largely a father figure. And whether or not he's a father in Islam or not, he's still regarded often as a father figure. And between Jesus and Muhammad and Moses, basically everybody except the mother of God in Christianity, everybody is, and the prophets, servants, I want to say. There are women in the Islamic stories, but they're always superseded by men. And so a lot of women got frustrated with that, as well as the combination of sexism and homophobia was just too much for them to stand. And that's why some of them, and the white women ended up in Wicca or elsewhere, like pursuing native religion or something. And most of the women of color ended up in whatever version or other spoke to them of their ancestors' religious traditions.
Okay, fascinating. So this was your second book, and am I right in assuming you were looking at ways that people or women were exploring their spirituality, and that led you to studying BDSM and spirituality? Is that a correct assumption to make? How did you end up looking at BDSM?
So there was another book in between those that was on the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. The Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence were founded in California, but eventually spread all the way around the world. There are houses in Europe, definitely in Australia and New Zealand. Also, they've been a little bit active in Asia. There's not a lot of sisters in Africa, though. And they're basically, I talk about them as drag nuns. In other words, they would look to most people like drag queens with extra makeup on, because they wear basically like a white undercoat on their makeup, and they put the rest of their makeup on top of it. It's usually just on their faces, but usually everything else is drag queens, except that they're drag queens who identify as nuns, not as Catholic nuns or Buddhist nuns or anything else, but specifically as Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence nuns. And so each location is set up as a house like nuns, but it's not a house that people live in, although definitely different members of the order live together, but it's because they're roommates or they're dating or whatever, or they're married or whatever. And so each house meets regularly and is dedicated to public service in one way or another. And what the specialty in public service of each particular house is depends hugely on who's involved in it and where they are.
That's fascinating. As someone from Australia and that studies sexuality quite intensely. I've never heard of them. I'm so amazed that there's always more people to find. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The Australian sisters were among the first to be founded because there were gay activists. I don't remember what city, Sydney, I think. There were gay activists there who followed the gay magazines, and of course there was a gay newspaper out of San Francisco, and it was constantly covering the sisters because that's where they were founded. And they discovered them and went, wait a minute. And one of them actually came up on a visit to San Francisco and was so convinced that he ended up getting ordained and then coming back and joining up with a friend of his. There is, of course, more complications to this story, but joining up with a friend of his, and they started the Australian Order, which still exists to this day.
How
and
amazing.
Has archives for anybody who's interested.
Mm. Yeah, I'll have to look that up after we finish our conversation. That's just fascinating. I love that there's always more to learn in this world of sexuality. So Thank you for that. Yeah. Okay, so you finish this book, and then what's next? What happens after that third book?
Okay, so what I ended up getting fascinated by is the connections between sisters, guards, and the leather community. So guards originated in France, in the French sisters, and they're called gardes cuisses because the guards Suisse are the Swiss guards that are associated with the Vatican, and cuisse refers to leather. So these are the leather guards, and basically as this practice spread very, very quickly to the US and elsewhere, drag queens and leathermen started getting together in the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. And the fact that the sisters focus so much on sexual health, because AIDS, of course, started shortly after they were founded, and so it became basically their cause célèbre all over the world. And the sisters, both, depending on the country they're in again, there are countries where their primary job is collecting money for AIDS charities, and other places where their focus is more on sexual health, and other places where their focus is on other things entirely, not focused at all on AIDS, not these days. But the connection between the sisters and AIDS is huge. It's also it's very historical, and that has connected them to the leathermen who became guards, because if you didn't want to do drag, originally there was no place for you in the sisters. And so very early on, there became a place for leathermen in terms of the guards. So because of the combination of a focus on sexuality and sexual health, and with the presence of leathermen, and some leather women as well have also been guards, the connection to kink came almost automatically. The connection is there for the sisters for sure, although they haven't focused on it. Individual houses may have, but none of the ones that I got involved in, none of the ones they did. But there was always at least some attention to kink, as well as some teasing and some joking and sister performances and so on. And the more I learned about it, so the sisters also, some of the houses that I spent time with also would spend time doing sisterly work at kink bars. So I was exposed there quite a bit as well. And I ended up talking to a bunch of people, both involved in the sisters and just at the bars that the sisters visited, a bunch of people who were into kink and saw it as deeply spiritual. And that, of course, checked all the boxes for me, and I got interested in this project.
Okay, so when people hear BDSM and spirituality, or kink and spirituality in the same sentence, many people outside of the community assume that they're opposites. Did you have that? Yes. Did you have that idea before your own experience in the community? And why do you think these assumptions exist?
I did not, because of my history of doing research in the community and always paying attention to religion and spirituality, always paying attention to sexuality, not just sexual identity. But I suspect that the reasons for the suspicion may have to do with the fact that many people understand religion to be hostile to sexuality, and sexuality to be completely separate from religion, especially but not only if they were raised in Christianity, because the hostility between Christianity, especially Catholicism, and sexuality is very strong and also very historical. The fact that they have celibate orders for men and women, and they separate them as though everybody is straight. That sends significant messages to people, along with the teachings that they have about sexuality. The celibacy sends significant messages to people about the connection between celibacy and religious achievement. And even though Buddhism does have celibate orders of monks and nuns, Buddhism is not so sexuality negative, and so Buddhists haven't had the same problems that Christians have had. Not overall.
So where are you up to with the book? Are you still writing it? Are you still researching it? And can you take us into your creative process for the book?
Yes. So originally my goal was to finish writing the book in 2026. Instead, I was thrown off my horse and almost killed, and ended up spending 2 months in the hospital and then another 6 months or so recovering. And I'm still not back to teaching because of administrative difficulties, which have become the curse of my existence.
Oh dear.
And so I do have all of my research records. I do have all of the interview recordings still that I did before my accident. And so I have gone back to places where I used to do field work. I also started a new place that I had read about in another academic's book. And once I ran into her giving a basically a seminar there, I was like, okay, this is not my space. But going back into that world and having basically a new perspective from having forgotten a bunch of things has been very helpful. It also has been a way of easing my way back into writing the book. So the first thing I'm expecting to begin working on the book this year.
Great.
The first thing I'm going to do is reread the book proposal and the project proposal. And then if there's anything that I reference in there that I'm interested in, I will also read that as well. But I'm basically going to go right to my field notes, and I have a whole bunch of interviews that I haven't even I haven't had any of the interviews transcribed yet for this project. And so I do have a little bit of grant money still. And so I'm going to have the interviews transcribed, and then I'm going to read the interviews as well. And that should not only spark my memory, but it should also bring the basically the conclusions that I was following up on back, and the current research, the research projects that I've done this summer will also inform that whole process. And so eventually, eventually ideas will start to form in my head from going, this is how the writing usually works. So, I hope it hasn't changed, but eventually ideas will start to form in my head from going back through all of the research materials. And I will start to think about, okay, what is the main argument of this book? What does that mean in terms of the chapters? How do I introduce this topic? How do I talk about the connection between kink and spirituality? And what kinds of stories from the interviews and the field work, what kinds of stories would be interesting to include?
Sounds like a very bottom-up approach that you're playing. Yeah, it's fascinating. I just want to be cautious around your memory of the interviews. Can I ask a little bit about them, or is that something that's not available to you right now? Okay, cool. So as you interviewed people for the book, what most stood out to you? Was there something that was surprising about the people that you were interviewing? Were you perhaps not expecting it to be so spiritual for people? What do you recall from those interviews?
In general, the connection between kink and spirituality surprised me, but it stopped surprising me long before I got too far into the research. So I would say what I found most interesting was how people made that connection. For instance, some people, every time they climax or come, there's a spiritual experience. For other people, spiritual experiences happen beforehand and end up leading to them coming or not. Or climaxing isn't a goal for some people. And they just, depending on whether they're in bondage or giving bondage to somebody or serving bondage to somebody else or being under the whip or the lash or handling the whip or the lash. Basically, all of those have different meanings, but it's always physical experiences that are connected to spirituality for them, which is not unusual for religious professionals either. But they don't link it to kink or sexuality for the most part. At least not openly.
Which is interesting, right? Because in some religions there's a history of self-flagellation, which...
Yes.
So how do religions look at that? Because obviously from a kink perspective, kinky people are like, well, that's kinky.
Yes.
How would they describe self-flagellation?
Kinky people?
No, religious people. How do they look at it? Is it just seen as like a religious practice?
Yes. Totally separate from sexuality. I mean, to be clear, some of the religious specialists that I'm familiar with are way more open than their congregations or people in their congregations, way more open than they are to any connection between spirituality and sexuality. So they're more open in general as religious specialists. They're more open to spirituality / religion encompassing the entirety of the human being. And they're also open to whatever people find spiritual counting. Especially queer religious specialists, because they've already been through having one person or another reject them because, oh, you can't bring queerness and religion together. Well, of course you can. It's just that person isn't aware of it, and so they have to scold people. They scold religious practitioners.
So the book is called Devotions. Why did you choose this name?
So it's called Devotions so far. That title might change, but basically because both religious people and religious/sexual people and kinky people talk about worship, talk about devoting yourself to, as in, for instance, in the kink scene, people might talk about devoting themselves to a daddy or to a master. And that is significant devotion, but it also looks quite a bit, most people would be shocked by this, but it does look quite a bit like people's devotion to deities and saints.
Yep.
Although the deities and saints can't touch you usually.
Why do you think people would be shocked by that?
Physical, because of what we've already talked about, the fact that so many people see sexuality and spirituality as opposite ends of the human spectrum.
I'm curious, have you had any pushback on studying kink in this way from academia at all? Has it been accepted in your academic institution?
To be honest, I haven't talked to the kinds of people who would be likely to give me pushback. So it has been accepted because I work primarily in queer and trans studies and religion. And so when I talk to other scholars who are in that area, they're actually fascinated by the focus of the project.
Great. Excellent. I'm so glad that tide has turned in many ways.
Definitely.
So ritual seems to be an important part of BDSM, right? And that's obviously something that religion, spirituality, and BDSM have in common. I'm curious to hear from you, why do you think that humans seem to need ritual in the first place?
Interesting question. I want to think that this is the first time I've reflected on this, so You're getting initial thoughts. But I want to think that there is some connection between people's recognition of the importance of a particular event and they're being moved by it. So whether that's an event in kink or an interchange in kink or a development in kink, or whether it's the same things, an event, an interchange, a development in spiritual practice or religion, they all seem to check those boxes of meaning, of deeper meaning.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it?
Yes.
I want to ask a deeper question, but we're getting quite philosophical. Why do you think it is that we need meaning? Is it because we need to give meaning to our suffering, the suffering that we experience from being human?
At the risk of challenging you, I want to say that is a particularly Christian interpretation.
Yeah, please.
And I don't know what your background is. I'm not accusing you of being Christian in any way, although I'm certainly wide open to the possibility. Instead, it's just the presence of Christianity in our two cultures that affect everyone, that affects everyone no matter what their actual religion is. I want to say instead that from the time we're kids, usually we're taught by family members that things are important when they're repeated. Like every year you have a birthday and there's a celebration. Every year you have religious festivals and there are celebrations for those. Every year, if your family is religious, every year you have other things involving your family, like your parents' birthdays or if they're married, their wedding anniversary, or a grandparent's birthday or something like that. And basically that sets up a structure for the children's lives year to year, because the years are so long when you're a child, and yet somehow everything keeps coming back. Everything important keeps coming back. And that seems to be what happens in not only religions, but the kink world as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not Christian, but obviously I've been brought up in Australia, and it is a very heavily Christian influenced society. So yeah, it was interesting to have that reflection back from you that was a Christian way of viewing the human experience. So thank you for that. That's food for thought, and I'll go away and think about that. I'm curious, from your time, so you mentioned that you've been doing ethnographic research and field work, and you were immersing yourself in kink communities and kink bars.
Yeah.
Has there been a particular moment during that research where you witnessed something in the kink community that you could only describe as sacred? If you're happy to share something that perhaps has stayed with you, that demonstrated what your book is, questioning and all about.
I would say that my own perception of sacred, so I am Wiccan, as I've talked about, my own perception of sacred is very much focused on individual experience of the sacred. So when I'm out in nature on a hike or something, I will have experiences of sacrality, but not at any kink gathering. I don't experience that. But for me as a scholar, that doesn't even matter, because I'm not a theologian. I'm not focusing on the sacred in my research. I just want to know what moves other people. What do other people find sacred? How do they approach sacredness, sacrality? How do they get there?
And would you say that that's a thread that connects all of your work, all of your research and all of your books? That's your main question? What is sacred to other people and how do they get there?
It's not. My main question is, how do queer and trans people fight for inclusion?
So is your book Devotions focused on trans and queer people mostly?
Yes.
Okay.
But I would say that over time, my books have developed more and more into what do queer and trans people do with religion and spirituality? What is a queer and trans form of religion and spirituality? Because the connection, as far as I'm aware, the connection between kink and spirituality, it's not limited to queer and trans kinksters, but there are more queer and trans kinksters involved in it than there are straight and cis kinksters.
Can you say that again?
So I don't know there are more queer and trans kinksters involved at the connection between spirituality and sexuality than there are straight and cisgender kinksters.
Yeah. So kink is queer.
I have no idea why that is. So what?
So you're saying kink is queer in many ways?
Kink spirituality is queer. And I have no idea why.
Mm. So you don't have a guess at this stage or a theory that you're holding in your mind? You're completely exploratory.
I would guess this is purely guesswork.
Sure.
So I would guess that there is some kind of connection between being raised in a place and in a family and in a religion where you're centered, and then discovering that you're not, that you're rejected. There's something about coming out that may be making spirituality more attractive to some people, that and yet because they've been so widely rejected by religion, queer and trans people have, this is perhaps the central theme in my research, because they've been rejected in so many religious organizations. Queer and trans people have set about creating their own forms, which are sometimes very unique, of religion and spirituality.
Rebellious spirituality in a way. Yeah. So
but it's not rebellious in terms of how it's carried out. Being spiritual as being rebellious, yes. But spirituality as rebelliousness, no.
Right. Got you. So looking ahead, what excites you most about the future of this research and your career and how it's progressing?
In terms of this research, I would say that what excites me the most is how many people are becoming involved with the field of queer and trans studies and religion. We managed to start a journal. I've held a conference at UC Riverside for several years. I've also held a dissertation, an annual dissertation fellowship, as in it's year-long. A dissertation fellowship for people finishing their PhDs on LGBTQ studies in religion. And the subunits within the American Academy of Religion are healthy and growing.
Great.
So I just look forward to who else is going to come through the door. Who else is going to develop within queer and trans studies and religion, and how many religions are going to end up being broadly included.
Amazing. What's the name of the journal so listeners can go check it out if they're interested?
QTR.
QTR. Okay, cool. I'll have to look that up as well.
It is an academic journal, so people who don't want to look up academic articles don't want to check that out. But as long as you have access to an academic library, you should be able to access the journal for free. It's Great. Of course very pricey, like academic journals usually are.
Yeah, well, usually in the podcast, each episode, we explore an academic journal with the guest, a research article. So I just haven't with you because, you know, you're an academic and we're going into your research the whole time. But yeah, I'll make a note of that and look it up and try to include some articles in future episodes. So that would be great. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Yeah, trying to bring our academia out into the general population a little bit more, because after being in academia, I know that there's so much work that happens behind the scenes, and a lot of the time people in the wider community don't get to read it. So that's part of the mission of this podcast as well.
Well, and also, to a certain extent, academics also keep to themselves. And so, there are, basically, I would say that there are walls, although in the U.S., not necessarily, in outside of England and Europe, maybe, not necessarily literal walls, but there are walls around academic pursuits, and we're also seeking to shatter those with QTR, because we always include creative works. In other words, we do pictures of sculptures and as well as creative essays or creative stories or poetry.
Oh, amazing. Oh, that's so good. Thank you for
Anything
doing
that
that.
comes to our creative editors that they approve of is published.
From including people outside of academia?
Yes.
Oh, great. I'll have to look into that because I do some writing as well. That's really exciting.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for creating that journal. It sounds great.
Sure. And so I did create it with a team. They all need credit.
Of course.
Or need to be honored. In other words, I didn't start it alone.
Yep.
I've never done any of this work alone other than writing my books.
Yeah, well, shout out to them, the QTR team. Thank you.
Yes.
Are there any other topics that you feel we haven't touched upon today that you'd like to speak to? Something around your journey through spirituality and highlighting queer and trans people, the importance of kink. You know, a lot of people that listen to this podcast are queer and kinky. Is there anything you'd like to say to them or a piece of information you'd like to pass on that we haven't spoken about?
So to the people who are queer and kinky, if this has been at all interesting, look into kink retreats as well as individual authors and podcasters and bloggers and so on who work at this intersection, because there are a number of them. There are also a number of retreats and groups to get involved in. You should just have to search kink and spirituality, and you'll be surprised by how much comes up.
Great. Yeah, thank you for that. And where can the listeners follow your work and keep up with your upcoming book devotions?
Primarily on my website right now. I have a professional Facebook page, but since the accident, I haven't been on it very much. And I don't know if I'm going to go back to it or if I'm going to do one of the newer social media approaches, because Facebook is aging very badly. So if you look up Melissa, M is my middle initial. Look up Melissa M. Wilcox, UC Riverside. That should be enough to get you to my website through my UCR webpage. And that's where any work that is significant, that'll get put up on the website.
Great.
Once I publish the book, I'm sure that there's going to be an announcement on the website.
Amazing. And are you looking for more people to interview for the book, or is that portion of your research closed?
I would love to interview more people. I have been having several people reach out. Only one interview has ended up actually happening, but I welcomed it. That was very exciting to do. So I will do interviews over Zoom or Skype or whatever. Basically, like I can welcome you into my Zoom. I'm also willing to join you at whatever video chat program you use.
Amazing. Well, you might get some people reaching out after this podcast.
And the email address, if I may say.
Sure.
The email address is just Melissa, MELISSA .WILCOX at UCR for UC Riverside.edu.
Perfect. And finally, if you had to describe your academic journey in one word today and one word only, what would that word be and why?
Growth. And it's because the field that I basically was a part of starting, there were other fields like gay and lesbian studies and religion before me. The field has grown both in its acceptance and in terms of its numbers. And so I've been there while the field has grown and been more widely accepted. And that has led to better and better jobs. And of course, the students are always interested. My students are always interested in the stuff that I'm teaching about. So I would say, actually, if I can,
sure.
The other word that I would say is student. Because of the major importance of students to me in my life, in my history, as well as in the field. Because students of mine have also contributed to the field and to growing it and so on. So I'm very grateful for them.
Wonderful. Well, Melissa, thank you so much for joining me today. And what I've really appreciated about this conversation is that it invites us to look beyond seeing spirituality and sexuality as opposing forces. And
yes,
I think this episode will encourage many listeners to rethink not only BDSM, but also what they believe spirituality can be. So thank you for the work that you do, and thank you for taking us into your erotic realm today.
You're very welcome, and thank you as well for inviting my erotic realm into my research erotic realm into the conversation with you.
Yeah, you're welcome back anytime. Thank you again. I'm Em, and this has been the Erotic Realm Podcast. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Erotic Realm Podcast. This is an independent podcast, and if you want to see more episodes made just like this one, you can support it at psychologyofdesire.com by becoming a paid subscriber and entering the realm with many other supporters. The mission of the Erotic Realm is to humanize kink and desire in all of its forms, and we can't do that without you. So until the next time, stay perverted.